this edition of the Newsmakers, the call of the people. We're looking at the death penalty and whether it has a place in Turkey's democracy. Also on today's program, educating the bubble wrap generation. Are safe spaces on America's college campuses a help or a hindrance to free speech? And in Picture This, a glimpse into the wild. Images of one of the last uncontacted tribes of the Amazon. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. For more than a month after the failed coup of July the 15th, huge crowds stayed out on the streets of Turkey every night. And as they gathered in the squares, one of their most frequent calls was for the return of the death penalty. Both Prime Minister Yildirim and President Erdogan say they will not stand against the will of the people. It's prompted criticism from abroad, with European leaders warning it will end Turkey's ambitions to join the European Union. But many other countries still use capital punishment, including G7 nations like the US and Japan. Our newsmaker today is the death penalty, as we ask whether it's the right course for Turkey.
On July the 15th, 2016, Turkey suffered yet another coup attempt. The country has a history of coups, with one almost every decade since the 1960s. But this time it was different. It was the public who helped stop the coup attempt. Young and old, religious or not, they took to the streets to make a stand. Since the failed coup, there have been many calls to reintroduce the death penalty to punish those responsible for killing around 250 people and injuring more than 2,000. President Erdogan said he will grant their wishes if approved by the parliament.
You asked for the death penalty, and it is the Turkish parliament that will decide on the death penalty. I hereby announce my decision that if the parliament makes such a move, I will approve it.
Turkey abolished the death penalty in 1999 in an effort to join the EU. More than 50 countries around the world execute certain criminals, including the US, Japan, and Russia. The European Union was quick to warn Turkey, saying yes to the death penalty will mean no to EU membership.
This is no excuse to take the country away from fundamental rights and rule of law. And we will be extremely vigilant on that for the sake not of the European Union or negotiations, but for the sake of Turkey itself.
Turkey is still bound by the European Convention on Human Rights, which bans capital punishment. But in this particular case, the president sees that as an interference in Turkey's domestic affairs.
I'm talking to the West. This country's faith isn't in your hands.
Joining the EU isn't the only obstacle. If Turkey reintroduces the death penalty, Parliament will have to change the constitution. The EU will not extradite any coup plotters to Turkey if the death penalty is in place in the country. It will be up to the Turkish parliament to decide whether it is in Turkey's best interest to bring back the death penalty. Christine Pirovolakis, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now in the studio are Yalım Eralp, a former ambassador who now works in Istanbul Culture University's Department of International Relations, and Selman Oğut, a law professor at Medipol University. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
It's a fascinating debate at an interesting time in Turkey's history. Ambassador Eralp, if the people want it, why not?
Well, first of all, most civilized countries and most states in the United States have abolished capital punishment. But this government seems to be retrograde, moves back in all fields. This is not a legal problem. It is a political problem. And death penalty cannot be applied retroactively. So those who think that it can be applied to Öcalan are mistaken.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. There seems to be a fundamental contradiction here, Selman, in that people are angry. The coup plotters killed more than 250 people. The PKK kills civilians and so on and so forth. But you can't go back and try people with the death penalty. It might be for future coup plotters, for future terrorists. Isn't that contradictory?
Actually, the death penalty discussion in Turkey, I think, misunderstood, because not just the coup plotters, also some sensitive points are at stake in question. We don't talk about right now a retroactive legislation right now. We talk about the future. The people here in Turkey, they are afraid of seeing new coup plotters, and they just want to hinder this kind of new attempts. And this is just one side of the problem. The other side is some murders, just like the murder of Özgecan, or those are very famous cases in Turkey, or Irmak, the 4-year-old child raped and killed by a 15-year-old guy. So those kind of crimes are also touches the nerves of the people.
Well, what about Ambassador Eralp's point that, according to him, Turkey seems to be going backward when everybody else is abandoning it?
Oh, this is a very, I think it would be a very long conversation between us, because I don't believe that the developmentalism project is successful. Because when we take a look from the history of developmentalism, is the doctrine dividing the countries as developing countries and developed countries. But we see that this is just the basis of the intervening into the countries. And human rights are just one side of it, because we don't see that the United States is a participant of ICC, International Criminal Court, or the American Convention. Just to finish, I just want to say that civilization is also misunderstood. I don't think that when you talk about Gandhi, when they asked to Gandhi what you think about the Western civilization, he said that it can be a good idea.
Yeah, he said, I think it'll be a good idea.
Let me say two things. First of all, introduction of death penalty does not decrease crime rate. It doesn't prevent. All the statistics around the world show that even where there is death penalty, crime rate is not decreasing. This is the first thing. Secondly, if Turkey introduces death penalty, Turkey is going to be kicked out of Europe, kicked out of the Council of Europe, whose headquarters is in Strasbourg, and relations with the EU will stop.
And
that is why I use the word retrograde.
Salman, is that worth it, being kicked out of the EU project, or being kicked out of the possibility to join the EU?
Let me add
because
also that
Brussels has said executing the death penalty is incompatible with membership in the COE.
Let me also add that even countries, Central Asian countries, whose democracy is worse than the Turkish democracy, have abolished death penalty.
So, Salman, is it worth it? Is it worth throwing away the possibility of joining Europe if the people want the death penalty for the parliament to approve of it?
Yeah, it's not my personal idea. According to the people in Turkey, they support this death penalty, but for some sensitive points, as I said, for the coup plotters or the rapers, some hard issues for people to accept. But when you take a look from the people's will in Turkey, if we say that democracy is the realization of the people's will, we say that death penalty can be offered to people with a referendum, with a plebiscite. But they say that it is against democracy. If democracy based on people's will, how can we say that just a tool of democracy is an obstacle? I can't understand.
So, Salman, if the people were asked death penalty or European Union, what do you think they'll choose
or Europe. Not only European Union, Council of Europe in Strasbourg.
Sure. What do you think? Oh, let me ask Salman and I'll come to you, Ambassador.
If you add the words, if you introduce death penalty, dollar will be 4.5 liras.
There's an economic argument as well, but we don't know, right? We don't know, for sure. But Salman, what do you think? What do people value more right now in your analysis?
You know, there are some surveys about it. The Europe right now in Turkey, the reflection of the European thought in Turkey is just the hypocrisy, because Europe is the place wherein the terrorist groups, can be protected, preserved. In Turkey, people think like this because you see that Erdogan's teleconference was prohibited, was banned in Germany, but PKK supporters can easily do anything in Europe. This is a big problem.
The Turks are not very happy with the Europeans. Let me ask you,
Well,
Yalimerov, as an
one
ambassador.
thing,
Okay,
you know,
add
people,
it, and I'll ask you.
What if you ask the people, we don't believe in freedom of thought, and people said, we don't like freedom of thought.
But that's esoteric, isn't it?
Why
It's
not?
nice for us to talk
Why
over,
not?
Yeah,
over
it's
dinner,
nice for us
right?
to talk about.
I don't think it will be a referendum, would it? I want to ask you about alternatives for Turkey, because President Erdogan has signaled possible Turkish joining of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Is that maybe a better bloc? China, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia,
joining non-democratic
Tajikistan,
countries.
Uzbekistan, India, Pakistan, democratic
They
countries.
are not. They are not members. They are observers.
Sure, okay.
Yeah,
But would
maybe
that...
Erdogan likes to join.
But looking east, maybe, as a policy, rather than looking
you
west.
don't have to join the Shanghai group to look at the east. If you want to do trade, Britain, France does more trade with Asia than does Turkey. So it has nothing to do. The question is political. Genetically, I think this government is not democratic. That is the problem. Because whatever President Erdogan says, he despises universally accepted
But putting
values.
a question
but
to a
there
referendum is pure democracy, isn't it?
No, it is not. Referendum, according to many people now in Europe, elsewhere, is one of the mechanisms which can destroy
So was the
democracy.
Brexit referendum undemocratic?
I think so. The British people are now unhappy.
So it's not
Because
just
you
Turkey,
can
it's Britain as well.
can use referendum
Right.
to do diverse things.
So what the British
And they-
people voted for the Brexit. So if you say that some of the British people are
Ambassador
unhappy,
Arab
okay,
says that was undemocratic. Let me ask you, Salman, very
I can
finally
say
about
that
I want to
there
ask
are
you
some
about the
articles
temperature.
about
Sure.
democratic coup, for example, America. Those are oxymorons. If
Okay.
you say that a plebiscite is undemocratic, if you say Brexit is undemocratic, it's just oxymoron.
Okay, fair enough. Finally for you, Salman, the issue of the temperature. At the time in July, and with the protests after the failed coup, people were calling for the death penalty on the streets, at the rallies. But it's November now. Maybe the temperature's lower right now. Do you think it would be as high right now?
No, it's not
than
about
was
it.
back in
There's
July?
also a result of a survey, this statistic, a pure statistic. Just 35% of the people in Turkey are satisfied with the punishment. Especially, as I said, there are some very specific crimes like rape and sexual harassment or killing people intentionally or coup plotters. So this is not just about a new atmosphere in Turkey which occurred after the coup attempt.
The
People are
government
not,
now introduces a bill
Right.
to pardon rapists.
Well, that's one
no,
interpretation.
it's not in that way.
But
No.
That's another discussion
I know,
altogether.
but you
Sure.
see, there is total inconsistency.
It's just a specific group of people
Sure.
who are in jail right now. But I
Okay.
agree with the
Sure.
former ambassador about this point that the draft or the article is not well prepared.
Okay, hopefully I'll get you guys back on to discuss that, but
Yeah,
we're out of
discuss.
time.
Yeah.
Yalim Arab and Salman Oud, thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome.
Still to come on the Newsmakers, we have a debate on safe spaces and whether they inhibit free speech. And in Picture This, incredible images of a rainforest community untouched by modern life. It's a place where people are meant to feel free of oppression and discrimination. Their use has rocketed at campuses across the United States. But there's a growing backlash against the so-called safe spaces, with critics claiming they create echo chambers of opinions and stifle free debates. The Newsmakers' Yvette McCullough reports.
The campus fallout to Donald Trump's victory. Dismay, disbelief, and a call for college sanctuaries.
We're here to demand that NYU make this campus a sanctuary to protect our students who are undocumented, to protect all the students that we have here.
No one actually believed Trump would win, and last night's election really devastated everyone.
I feel angry, I feel scared, I feel confused.
And it's important for everyone, not just undocumented immigrants, to feel safe on this campus.
For many in the college sphere, Trump's presidency is being treated as shocking and traumatic. Students at the University of Michigan were offered post-election self-care events with Play-Doh, colouring books and Lego. At the University of Pennsylvania, there were so-called safe spaces with puppies. Students at Cornell held a cry-in. At Yale, they shared a group scream. Stanford offered psychological counselling. And some universities even cancelled classes or exams to give people time to grieve. On many US campuses, there is an assumption that the wrong candidate won. But is this the kind of political coddling that gave rise to Trump's victory in the first place? America has battled with moral ideology for much of its history. The modern culture wars in the 1960s were fought over ideas like black civil rights, gay rights, feminism and abortions. But it was thought that fight was over, that the left had, and always would, win the culture wars. But Donald Trump's victory shows that these wars are far from over. Universities across the US are increasingly offering safe spaces where students can escape prejudice, and no platforming, banning speakers who have upsetting opinions. Those in favour say they're necessary to protect students and ensure hateful ideas aren't given a podium. But others believe they're an attack on free speech, and that from the campus to social media, the bright minds of the future are living in echo chambers with distorted worldviews, damaging to democracy. So should colleges be a place of sanctuary where students can avoid feeling oppressed or threatened? Or is this stifling of opposition and argument more dangerous? Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Chicago is Jonathan Helwink. He's a history professor at Wilbur Wright College. And from San Francisco, Juan Prieto. He's a student at the University of California and a protest organizer for Fight for Spaces of Color. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Juan, at Berkeley, you're calling for safe spaces for people of color. Why does Berkeley or any other college in the US need safe spaces for people of color when you have a democracy and students are treated equally under the law?
Right. I think first we need to clarify that the spaces of color we were fighting for aren't necessarily this ideological space that the media keeps sort of spinning. Quite literally, it's a physical safe space. So the campaign is organized by Bridges, which is a multicultural resource center that tries to recruit and retain students of color onto this university. Since Proposition 209 banned affirmative action in the University of California, we saw a decrease of students of color onto this campus. And so Bridges came about an attempt to recruit and retain these students.
Jonathan, Juan says that their legitimate fears are being treated with contempt. They're not being taken seriously. Minorities, the undocumented, feeling harassed and squeezed and so on. You've written, Jonathan, that safe spaces just make the world more dangerous. Why do you say that, Jonathan?
Well, thanks for having me, first off. What I would say is a lot of what Juan said I actually agree with. I think it makes some sense to provide certain protections to individuals who come from backgrounds that are not historically represented in American higher ed. I think a lot of that kind of makes sense. What I wrote about in my article was that I think there's really kind of two different safe spaces that we're talking about here. The first is the one that Juan is talking about, where individuals can go to an actual physical place on campus to feel safe. And I think what he means, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but what he means is to be with people who are like-minded, who share their experiences, who understand the kind of things that they are encountering both on campus and in their world as well. I think there's a lot of validity to that kind of safe space argument. The one that I think actually does make the world more dangerous is when that safe space is in the classroom. And that's what my article is really about. I think what is often forgotten in this debate around safe space is that there really is a sanctuary already on campus, a safe space already in place for any ideas to be expressed, obviously with certain restrictions and with guidance and moderation from the professor, and that is the classroom.
Right. Okay, so Jonathan makes some interesting points there, Juan. Are you convinced by any of that? Because he's saying, yes, he's fine with a physical safe space where you want to be among people who think like you or who are like you and you feel comfortable around, but that you shouldn't be drowning out or shouting out alternate ideas or ideas that you don't like. Are you for that, Juan?
Yeah, and I don't think that's anything we currently advocate for. I mean, the classroom is, as he's mentioned, a place where the professor serves as a moderator, and you have different ideas battling it out. It just so happens that some ideas get heard louder. There's a specific sort of history that gets told where they look at people that come from our backgrounds as the other. It doesn't sort of tell Latin American history as something that might belong to a student in the classroom. It's told as the other. And so though there is a sort of, the professor does serve as the moderator, there is a certain advantage to someone who comes from a specific background as opposed to another. Right. And I mean, that just so happens to be the classroom. It's a battle of wits. It's with a moderator as a professor. And it just so happens that we need that physical space to then go to discuss discuss these experiences of, hey, they were talking about the community I come from as if it's something else, not something that I personally came from. And so, right, the classroom does serve as this place where you can discuss how these ideas that conflict each other. In fact, after we did a protest on Say Their Gate in which the media spun it as if we were not allowing white students in, which was completely untrue. It was fabricated by a reporter in London whose name is Lucas Michaelionis, and who was not on the scene at all. It's then been, administration has sort of cleared that up, administration who was present, and even the police said that's not what was happening. They were blocking all students. But it's just really scary how quickly you can turn our voices into something that's very hostile,
right.
and then turn it against us.
And it's good that you clarified that.
And so that's what we're dealing with in the classroom as well.
Jonathan, I want to broaden this out to the elections, because 2016 seems to be the year of identity politics or culture wars in the United States, and punctuated by the Trump presidential election. There's an argument that liberals or the left made the mistake of being fixated on identity politics to the extent that they didn't realize that some white people could then pick up the ball and say, hey, we're also going to try identity politics, and with that we're going to vote for Donald Trump, and we're going to vote based on our white identity as well. Do you concur with that?
Well, I think, I mean, we're only, well, it's going to be 2 weeks tomorrow out of the election, so I think we're still just beginning the process of understanding why people voted, why they voted. But I've heard what you've said a lot, and I've seen it in my classroom as well. And I'm glad to hear what Juan said. I think he has a very good approach to this. What I would say, though, is that there is a movement within the classroom, though, to curtail free speech, and that comes to the point where we're talking about things in class that might be dangerous or might be controversial, or which some students might find hurtful. There is an argument among primarily people on the left that do want to impact speech in the classroom. For instance, teaching works of literature that may have controversial scenes in them or controversially named characters. And in my opinion, in my approach to this topic, I think all of that stuff is off limits. I really don't think it makes much sense at all to avoid controversial topics in the classroom. Now, there is a right way, I think, and a wrong way, I think, to approach these topics, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong at all, I think, with empathy in the classroom. I see it a lot in my students now since the election. I have many undocumented students in my classroom, in all of my classes, and yes, they are concerned about what the next few months will bring, or what the next 4 years will bring. And I think, getting back to your question, that's kind of both the challenge and I think part of the reason why people voted for someone like Donald Trump. You know, I ask my students, and I think myself, you know, what was Donald Trump's position on immigration? What was his position on trade? What was his position on any number of issues? And the truth is that when you listen to the things that he says often contradictory things.
Okay, gentlemen, unfortunately, I've got to wrap. It's been a pleasure, both from Chicago and the Bay Area. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us, Jonathan and Juan. In today's picture, one of the last uncontacted tribes in the Amazon has been spotted from the air, but they're at risk as the modern world comes ever closer to their lands. Let's take a look. You've been watching this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Thank you for watching. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.